Hey guys, Mrhappy here with a video regarding some of the more important changes in Beta Phase 4. As you remember previously, we spoke about a lot of the system and character stuff, but this time we're going to be talking about classes and jobs. So a lot of people kind of panicked when I said that Bard was no longer going to need Conjurer as a subclass. It's been a staple for a while, but so I figured I'd update everyone on the changes for each of the battle jobs. Keep in mind this video will not be going over all the Summoner and Scholar abilities that have been floating around since we haven't actually gotten to test them yet. First, let's switch over to the new layout since people kinda like this and this constitutes as news, so... Okay, I think that's good. So anyway, let's start with Paladin. Now, Paladin people have been kinda, about... But Riot Blade, Rage of Halone, Shield Swipe, and Circle of Scorn all saw potency increases. Sword Oath even saw potency increase, with their auto attack potency increasing all the way up to 50, up from 25 before. If you're wondering what the potency increases are, they were Riot Blade now does 230 potency, Rage of Halone does 260, Sword Oath had their potency increased to 50, Shield Swipe was increased to 210, and Circle of Scorn had it increased to 100. That's pretty big. But that's not all they got. I mean, Awareness also had its reduced oncoming crit chance buffed from 15% to 25%. Awareness made you so if someone hit you, you had less a chance of being crit. The chance of being crit is now even less now. And Shield Oath strangely saw a nerf. Shield Oath had both its damage reduction aspect and its damage done aspect nerf. So basically now you deal more damage with Shield Oath on, but you take more as well. So it's more of a redirection than a nerf. So overall, there isn't really much to say about this. It just seems that they wanted to increase Paladin's damage contribution in raids, but calculated that with a shield, they didn't need the extra 5% mitigation from Shield Oath on top of all their other abilities. So that's their call. Let's see how it plays out in early access, in endgame, and when the game launches. So next, let's talk about Monk, which the changes here were pretty big. Monk can no longer pull from the Gladiator class, and no matter what class they're pulling from, I'd call that a buff. But now they pull from Marauder, which gives them access to some more survivability, like Bloodbath. They could also use Fracture now as an additional damage over time if they really wanted to, but it's not too much of a big deal there. Second Wind was changed drastically. It's no longer a flat percentage HP heal. It is now a basic 400 potency cure that scales with your attack power. So when you use abilities that increase your attack power or anything at all, it increases in power as well. For monks, the trait Third Wind had to also be changed, so now it says that it is 650 potency. Additionally, Mantra's effect was completely revamped. Originally, Mantra was an ability you clicked on a single person to increase their healing done, but because monks are DPS, is a DPS job, they figured that's too much time taken away from actually doing DPS. So they decided to make Mantra be an AoE around the user that increases healing received. So it's much more effective now. It is a huge buff to the ability, to the survivability of the raid and to the survivability of the monk. It wasn't all good news though. Fist of Fire had its damage reduced from 10% to 5%. I guess that kind of makes sense considering that with the way the changes were, it was a bit much, and I'll go into that in a little bit too. Howling Fist also saw some of its damage taken away, but it got a huge buff in the form that it's no longer a 5-minute cooldown, it is now a 1-minute cooldown. So that is a huge buff. I'll lose 20 potency to have a 4-minute less cooldown any day. And finally, Dragon Kick also reduces the target's int by 10%. Not sure why they added that in, but it's a buff, straight up. It's just adding a new effect to an ability. It's a buff. So overall, it seems like they wanted to fix up their tools and give them more sustainability and survivability. Reducing fist damage makes a lot of sense actually, because with 3 stacks of Grease Lightning and the Twin Snakes buff on top of the previously 10% Fist of Fire buff, you were getting a free 35% extra damage. And even though it's still 30%, and that's still a lot. So that's, it is what it is, guys. So the Howling Fist change is clearly a buff though. So it's overall, it looks like buffs across the board from a monk. Even though some abilities seem to have gotten nerfed across the board, it's definitely a buff, trust me. So next we have Warriors, which if you thought Paladins got some good changes, you gotta see these Warrior changes because they gave them a massive boost to their overall damage and survivability. They heard people saying, oh, you know, Warrior feels like they just take more damage or they don't have as much raid utility. They changed Warrior from what looked like just a basic tank to like a really high-end, you know, really good at anything tank. Now both Paladins and Warriors both look like they can do anything they want. So let's talk about some of their damage increases first. Mage had its potency increased, not by a lot, but it had its damage bonus increased. Now, originally, Mage gave you a 10% boost in damage. Now it gives you a 20% boost in damage. That is huge. 10% more damage. I guess they just took it off Fist of Fire and threw it on Warrior. Mercy Stroke saw a nerf of 50 potency, which some would say is a pretty big nerf, but that barely matters considering it sits on a really long cooldown, and the heal it provides is the real utility. It just means that you have to time it a little bit better to get that heal. So Defiance, now there was a few big changes here with Defiance. The first one is that the damage dealt aspect was nerfed by 5%, meaning that the damage that they take wasn't nerfed, unlike Shield Oath, but the damage that they deal was buffed. So they do now 5% more damage in Defiance than they did before. Additionally, they added a new mechanic to the Wrath stat. Wrath stats are stacks you gain whenever you use certain abilities that give you more crit chance. Well, now each one of these stacks also gives you 3% increased healing received. This means that you will sometimes maybe have to think about using your stacks before you do use them, making sure that in case you need the extra 15% heals for longer. It's pretty good, and I actually really like that change. Butcher's Block saw a basic damage increase, nothing much, just a couple digits in potency. But Inner Beast and Storm's Path saw unbelievable buffs in both damage and function. Inner Beast now absorbs 300% of the damage you deal as HP, and considering the attack does 300 potency, that is a lot, by the way. That means that the heals from Inner Beast they're usually around 1k. That's huge. A 1k heal, and considering Wrath Sack's so much faster now, oh man, that's a huge buff to Warrior's survivability. Storm's Path, on the other hand, was given the combo potency it didn't have before. Previously, comboing Storm's Path just lets you heal off of the base 100 potency and the damage that dealt, but now it has 250 potency when implemented in a combo, and on top of that, the healing aspect was buffed. Now, instead of doing 20% of your damage as up to a maximum of 10% of your HP, 10% of your maximum HP, it's now 50% of the damage you deal, which you can use it quite often, so that's really good. That's a really consistent healing mechanic to have. So expect to use this move a lot more. Storm's Eye also had its combo potency increased as well, but now it also reduces healing received by the enemy by 50%. So just, again, overall buffs across the board. And as I said before, slightly Wrath stacks much faster now. They added it to pretty much every combo move other than your first move in your combo. So you pretty much get 5 stacks by going through your rotation twice now. And it's so much quicker than it used to be before, which means you'll get to use Inner Beast, Steel Cyclone, all those great moves that you love. You'll get to use them way more often. So overall, it seems like they wanted to put emphasis on Wrath and the healing aspect of Warriors. Warriors still lack much of the raid utility that Paladin has, such as being able to reduce oncoming damage and the ability to protect other players, but their straight up tanking is now much better. And it actually scales better with damage now than Vitality, which is interesting. Because their heals don't really go off their maximum HP much anymore, you still have abilities like Stone Skin and Thrill of Battle that do go off max HP, but pumping strength now seems to be much more efficient on a warrior. So there's always been that debate of strength versus vitality, and for warriors it seemed like people always lean towards vitality, with Second Wind no longer being a percentage heal, with a lot of their healing no longer being based on their maximum HP outside of Thrill of Battle. It seems like the amount of enemy and healing they receive now from pumping strength is a lot more consistent. So I'd say throw 30 points into strength now if you were going to throw 30 points into strength in Vit before. If you already put some points into Vit in phase 4, then put the rest into strength until you swap them, because you're going to want to do that extra damage now, and trust me, it'll be better for you in the end. So next we have Dragoon, which saw some more awkward changes that moved around the levels at which you obtain certain abilities. And they're one of 2 jobs that sort of got this change. It was a little weird. But first off, Dragoons did lose Archer as a subclass, which is a big nerf to their available subclasses. So they now have Marauder and Pugilist as their subclasses, and not to harp on those 2, but despite, Marauder doesn't really give as much damage as Archer does. So overall, it's a pretty big nerf. but we'll look at their other abilities and see if it's an overall nerf, because just because they took away one thing doesn't mean they didn't give them a ton of other stuff. And trust me, they did give them a ton of other stuff. Keen Flurry had its potency increase, but this is just a parry move. It just parries a lot more often now, so that's all you really need to know. Vorpal Thrust becomes available at an earlier level just to give people more damaging moves at the same levels other classes get them when leveling up. So it's Vorpal Thrust now available at level 4, and Keen Flurry had its level changed as well, up to 6. Life Surge had its healing component nerfed, and that's probably because we're about to see a lot of damage increases. If you're going to nerf Archer part and the healing part, you're probably going to nerf, you're probably going to buff some of the other things to make up for it. So Jump had its damage increased and its cooldown decreased. So it's a 40-second cooldown now, which is really, really short. It wasn't that long before, it was a minute, but 20 seconds is 20 seconds. That means every 3 minutes, or every, 4 minutes, you can now pull off an extra jump in that time, because after 3 jumps, you've saved a minute worth of time. So then you have Phlebotomize. It had its damage over time increased. In fact, it had its damage over time effect doubled from 10 to 20. So that's a huge buff you can't ignore. Just because it's only 10 to 20, it's still double. So don't worry, guys. Power Surge had its recast reduced to 90 seconds. This is pretty big. This is half of its recast was taken away. It was 180 seconds, now it's 90 seconds. That means your jumps will be a lot more powerful, a lot more often. And Dragon Fire Dive also saw a cooldown reduction of 120 seconds from 5 minutes down to 3 minutes. So that, again, it's just a buff. It just means you can more safely use Dragon Fire Dive multiple times in a fight, which is what I think they were going for with this cooldown reduction. Finally, the Exhilarate trait, which buffs your Invigorate when you're on a Dragoon, now grants you 500 TP with your Invigorate. I guess they saw that maybe you needed that extra TP as a Dragoon, just because your moves are extremely TP dependent, and having 500 extra TP every once in a while, definitely helpful. So overall, it seems like they wanted to remove Archer as a subclass, but reduce all of the cooldowns and increase the potency of their damage. With shorter recasts and more damage, it seems like more of a redirection of damage to me, but we'll see in time if the Archer subclass having those couple of cooldowns really makes a difference. To me, it looks like an overall buff, guys. So next we have Bard, and Bard saw some huge changes that I've had to talk a lot about in the past couple of days on my stream. So Conjurer is no longer a subclass for Bard. Bard uses Pugilist and Lancer as subclasses to better emphasize their damage role over their support role. To prove this, here's a screenshot of my Bard, which I pretty much played for half of Beta Phase 4, which has both Pugilist and Lancer abilities. I know it's hard to see, but Second Wind is on the second action bar, and you can see other abilities from both Lancer. Like, you can see Blood for Blood on the left-hand side as well. So you can see I am using Pugilist and Lancer abilities. We don't know which one is the most important subclass, but those are now the subclasses. Conjurer's out. Damage dealers, you won your battle. Bards are primarily damage dealing now. So let's look at some of the other buffs that Bard saw. That's right, they get even more buffs than that. Hawkeye now additionally grants 15% dex when you use it. So that's 15% more. If you had 400 dex, you get 15% more dex. No one's complaining about that. That's a huge buff. Windbite slightly buffed alongside a Flaming Arrow. They both had their damage over time potencies aspect increased by like 5 or 10, but over the course of how long they last, that's a pretty big buff. So next you have Quelling Strikes. Odd change here. Quelling Strikes had its level lowered to make it accessible more easily to the subclasses, I suppose. As Enhanced Quick Knock also saw its level decrease. The Quelling Strikes is 34 and Enhanced Quick Knock is 36 now, but Flaming Arrow had its level increased up to 46. River of Blood actually also had its level increased to 48. This was the ability that made Bloodletter reset upon your damage over time abilities critting. But now it has actually got buffed other than that, because now when you're 50, you don't really care what the levels are. It now has a 50% chance to reset Bloodletter when Windbite or Venomous Bite crit. So that's a big deal. That is a huge, huge deal. And finally, Reign of Death no longer increases the damage taken by enemies by 10%. So it seems like they took away some of their support and raid utility to really emphasize them as a damage dealer. They want people to look at Bard as a damage dealer that gives back to their raid in just one or two ways. So don't get me wrong, their utility it got completely smashed with the removal of Conjure. It got melted. But people really wanted a ranged DPS, so you now have one. And trust me, I played Bard for so much. Even when you're singing, even during the 20% damage decrease, you're on par with other jobs. So trust me, if you were thinking about playing a ranged DPS before, try out Bard now. Trust me, you won't be disappointed. It's a lot of fun. So next we have White Mage. White Mage didn't see that many mechanical changes like some of the other jobs saw, but they did see cure potency increases across the board except for one ability. But it's likely in response to Scholar's roles and abilities. Scholar, they probably wanted to have less healing potency and more utility. So with White Mage, they just buffed the overall cure potency. Makes sense to me. It wouldn't have made sense to have similar cure potencies and one of them do something extra. So it seems like a good change to me. Something to note though, Cleric Stance had Scholar added to its list of available jobs. And Arcanist, Scholar, and Summoner were added to the usual abilities like Cure, Protect, and Stone Skin. So it seems like Cleric Stance by definition is like a healer becoming a damage dealer. So it's like being an offensive healer, essentially. So that's why they gave it to Scholar, and it makes sense. And Scholar actually has some pretty good tools to utilize with that. So have fun soloing Scholars because you have a little bit more damage on your side now. Next, you have Cure, Medica, Cure 2, Regen, and Cure 3. These all saw potency increases across the board, anywhere from 100 to 150. Medica 2 saw a potency decrease in their initial heal. However, the Medica 2 part that heals you over time, the regen aspect, its potency got doubled from 50 to 100. So I can't complain. That's overall buffs to me. The thing is, that just doesn't even look like redirection of power from like Scholar to White Mage. Those are just straight out buffs, guys. Overall, good. It seems like White Mage is meant to do more straight up healing, and they definitely got it. So we'll see about it when Scholar comes out in a week, though. We'll see about it then. So finally, Black Mage. Black Mage saw the least amount of changes across any of the combat jobs. They just had some slight buffs and some tooltip fixing, really. So Thunder, Surecast, and Swiftcast all had Arcanist, Summoner, and Scholar added to their available jobs list. At the same time, though, Thunder 2 was removed from White Mages. It doesn't really hurt White Mages all that much, let's be honest. Next, Scathe, Blizzard 2, and Blizzard 3, and Fire 3 all saw potency boosts, which is a big deal. And it was only by 20 points, but with the way that Firestarter procs work and the way that the Astral Fire aspect scales, any potency boost is more than it seems with a Black Mage. And Scathe having 20 more potency means it's a lot more effective when you're running around, when you need to be moving and damage dealing at the same time. It's now a lot more effective than it used to be, especially when you proc the double damage trait with Black Mages. And finally, Fire 2, Blizzard 2, Fire 3, and Blizzard 3 just had their tooltips redone to state that they grant extra stacks of Astral Fire, Umbral Ice. And that, honestly, after seeing that and trying it out, I played a lot of Black Mage in Phase 4 also, and they felt way stronger than they did at high levels, which is odd because I doubt it's from the 20 potency increase as much as understanding where Flare fits in their rotation, but the small changes will help them a bit with their mobile and standstill DPS. Trust me, if you were on the border about Summoner and Black Mage, you're going to be a little bit more on the border now, because they definitely got a power boost, and it does feel a lot more rewarding to play a Black Mage now. So that's pretty much all the changes that we're going to discuss in terms of combat jobs. Scholar and Summoner information is floating around in the net, but there's a few places where it's unreleased as far as I'm concerned, and I don't want to talk about it. So we're gonna wait until early access or launch, whenever we actually get to try them, to talk about them. Oh, and I didn't forget, you crafters out there, don't worry, there were only a few changes. Crafting classes had the level of their certain abilities increased or decreased, but they still have all the same tools at level 50, so no big deal there. Gathering classes also saw each of a few level changes, but they also got 2 new abilities, one for Miner and one for Botany, and that's Truth of Mountaineers and Truth of Forests, which can be used to find rare materials, even pets, which is pretty cool. So definitely go try those out. As for fishing, it's actually fun. Go try it out. But anyway, guys, thank you for watching. I hope you enjoyed this video. If you did, please like, favorite, subscribe, and share for future Final Fantasy XIV updates. You can also follow me on Facebook and Twitter. You can also follow me on Twitch to watch me stream occasionally. You can donate to my YouTube channel to help me get better equipment, or you can donate to gamingforgood.net. It is a charity foundation that works with Save the Children. They really appreciate any donations they can get. They're up to $4.5 million out of $5.1 million raised, so definitely head over there and check them out. But anyway, guys, thank you for watching. I hope you enjoyed it. Until next time, take care.